While the name Starbreeze Studios might not mean much to a lot of people anymore, back in the day, these guys were responsible for some of the most innovative and unique first-person shooters we ever got, with The Darkness, Syndicate, and case in point the Chronicles of Riddick games, which arguably did a better job with the character than even the films did.
You afraid? I'm not.
The early 2000s was also just such a burgeoning period for the industry as well, where things seemed to be advancing exponentially. And that first game, Escape from Butcher Bay, is a really early example of a truly immersive and cinematic first-person experience, with a lot of elements and mechanics still being used in gaming even to this day, with even the recent Indiana Jones and The Great Circle taking a lot of influence from it. Probably as well because that thing was developed by Machine Games, who are comprised of a bunch of people who once used to work at Starbreeze.
Just working my way to the top.
Anyway, with the semi-recent news that we may be getting a fourth Riddick film coming out in the near future, and also because I've never really been all that happy with the old videos I did for both of these games, I thought it might be fun to go back and take another look at what makes both of these so goddamn good.
I'll take it.
Sound good? Right, let's get into it.
Okay. Close the gate.
But before I get too far into things, I do have to thank Factor75 for sponsoring this video. Right, so if you're anything like me, then chances are you've got a pretty busy schedule, and probably don't want to worry all that much about spending too much time in the kitchen making something to eat when you've got all this stuff going on. Or maybe you just want to eat something healthy and quick without having to spend $50 on Uber Eats. Well, Factor75 offers up a solution with stress-free, ready-to-eat meals. Now these are fresh, never frozen meals made by chefs and also approved by dietitians, all ready to eat in just 2 minutes. With 35 options that are changed up every week, including keto, high protein, and vegetarian choices. Along with 60 various snack options too, with juices, breakfasts, and smoothies. You can order up to 18 meals per week, or even as little as 4, as well as pausing or rescheduling your deliveries at any time. All of which just eliminates the hassle with prep time, cooking, and cleaning up. So you can simply heat up your food and get back to doing what you do best. So to get 50% off your first Factor box along with free shipping, be sure to click the link in the video description, or scan the QR code on screen with your phone. And yeah, once again, thanks to Factor75 for sponsoring this video. So the game opens up before the events in the second film with Riddick looking like a bit of a hobo, before it then flashes back a few years to a time when he was captured by bounty hunter William Johns, and is being shipped off to the notorious Slam, Butcher Bay.
You don't move until I say so.
You get a really neat prologue sequence here which teaches you the basics of the combat, the stealth, and the shooting, before it turns out that all of this was just Riddick dreaming.
Rise and shine, Riddick.
He wakes up at that point and is introduced to the warden of the prison, a dude with a German accent named Hoxie.
Secure your weapon, Johns.
Good to see you too, Warden.
So, the famous Mr. Riddick.
No one who speaks German could be an evil man.
Along with Hoxie's right-hand man named Abbott, voiced by none other than your boy Exhibit.
Looks like I need a new rooster. You interested?
Who I guess took a break from doing crippling cosmetic work on 20-year-old shitbox cars to voice a character in a video game.
Indeed. And we don't want that.
And all up, like, the voice acting across the board is pretty damn good here, with everyone sounding like they put gravel in their coffee each morning and brushed their teeth with charcoal. But what's most impressive about Butcher Bay, though, is that it really does a better job at making Riddick seem like a badass than even the movies do.
Riddick. Shit. I think you're gonna need backup.
Truly making it one of the all-time best movie tie-in video games ever made, really rivaled only by The Thing. It shows what happens to Johns and Riddick before the events in Pitch Black, for instance, and it even explains how Riddick gets his eye shine ability.
Not light.
Which is not only cool from a story point of view, but becomes essential during the gameplay, as it's a mechanic that lets you see in the dark. Vin Diesel obviously lent his likeness to the character, but more than that, also his voice, really making the whole thing feel like a truly official experience. It just shows the potential of what can happen when an actor properly gets involved in the production of a video game that's based off their character. And I can't really think of any other celebrity who's given so much to a role like this to really ensure that it comes across as faithful as possible.
It ain't the fall that gets you. It's a sudden stop at the bottom.
It just effortlessly captures that feeling of being trapped on this barren, lifeless planet in a grimy, filthy shithole that's had more men go through its insides than your mum's had. Plus, it just effortlessly nails the feeling of letting you play as this super badass dude.
I don't prove anything to anyone.
And the entire event in the game is really just Riddick trying to escape the prison and be left alone, because people still haven't figured out that he's not someone you want to mess with. And after everything that happens, it's still kind of crazy to think that these events are preceding 3 feature-length films. My only complaint is that it doesn't quite coincide with the events in Pitch Black. I mean, considering how Johns and Riddick leave things off at the end of the game, it just doesn't seem like their relationship could deteriorate as much as it does in the movie. But I guess that's a problem you face when the writers for a video game seem to understand a character better than they were portrayed in a movie.
You and I are leaving Butcher Bay.
Not bad, Johns. Someday, you might just learn how to do this for a living.
3 days later.
Anyway, the main point of this intro is just to really emphasize how even for a maximum security prison, Butcher Bay ain't the kind of place you want to find yourself. Riddick has marched through the entrance during this main title sequence, where his first job is to find a shiv to defend himself, which then has you roaming around the nearby cells and rec yard as you meet some of your fellow inmates, all of whom seem like pretty mean dudes. And again too, featuring a pretty damn stellar voice cast of some of the all-time best character actors, like Ron Perlman, Michael Rooker, and Steve Bloom.
You should see Haley. He can help you out.
The attention to detail with these prisoners is also really ahead of its time as well, to the point that every single one of them has their own name and personality. I mean, it could have been really easy to have a bunch of nameless NPCs wandering around to give the illusion of the place being busy, but every single one of these guys has something unique about them. Even down to old mate here wandering around the yard muttering to himself.
Hey, bud. Things like hands.
I like it too how you can see prisoners praying at certain times of the day, which is even kind of funnier considering the backdrop. I mean, Butcher Bay is supposed to be one of the most notorious slams in the entire universe.
Show yourself!
But I guess if nothing else, it's at least tolerant of people's religions. What's great about this campaign too is that it never feels like it's getting bogged down with one concept or idea for too long. Like early on, you've got all these sequences where you're doing odd jobs for the other inmates.
Thanks for wasting Molina.
Along with getting into fistfights and stirring up a bunch of trouble. Even taking out one of the higher ranking prisoners to assert your dominance. Yeah, some asshole named Rust who's responsible for handing out all the shivs in the area, and doesn't like it when Riddick happens to find one on his own. And look, like, I don't know much about how social standings work in prison, but I'm gonna take a rough guess that making an enemy out of someone solely responsible for supplying people with sharp, pointy things probably ain't a smart move.
See this? It belongs to me.
Anyway, then after that, there's a whole escape sequence, like a full-on prison riot with a bunch of shootouts and everything. Before it then changes things up a bit and you're now underground in all these dark tunnels, taking on the Dwellers, which are more or less emaciated zombies attacking you in droves. And this kind of game is similar vibes to Half-Life 2, when you suddenly found yourself in Ravenholm at night time, fighting all the headcrab zombies and their nightmare fuel variants. And to make this stuff even more tense, your flashlight is slowly dying the entire time, with the battery draining constantly.
Estimated time to failure, 5 minutes.
After that, Riddick's out of the sewers and he's back to trying to find the spaceport. And this next part is almost like a Hitman game or something, letting you don different disguises as you sneak around in plain sight.
The wolf moves among sheep.
You can even find a guard's uniform as well, allowing you to access the area further without pissing everyone off. Then ending with a boss fight against Abbott.
Riddick! You just made the last mistake!
Before Riddick's apprehended and sent to an even higher security area. Now the objective becomes to somehow get to the mines and make contact with another inmate named Jagger Valance, who can help you steal John's ship. Yeah, Jagger Valance, not to be confused with Jack Palance.
You are my #1 guy.
This initially mirrors that opening sequence set inside the prison yard, giving you more opportunities to mingle with your fellow criminals and do a bunch more odd jobs. And all of this does remind me quite a bit of that whole side mission structure they used in The Darkness.
I find anything, I'll let you know.
where you could take the extra time if you wanted to chat to random NPCs and explore all of that side content.
You know what I'm saying?
Either way though, to get to the mines, you're gonna need to distract the guards. And you can do this by either getting caught with drugs or the far superior option, by causing a ruckus and competing in this whole underground fighting ring. And yeah, underground fighting ring, like where have I seen that before recently? And this is like a whole side chapter in and of itself, where you go around the area challenging other inmates before then kicking 7 shades of shit out of them. Or alternatively, just letting them ragdoll themselves to death. Either way though, once you make it to the mines, the plan then becomes to blow up some kind of bomb, or to release a bunch of hostile alien creatures from beneath the planet, so you can hopefully escape during all of that pandemonium.
Beautiful.
This all ends in another series of shootouts where it even starts to feel a bit like surface tension in Half-Life, where both the aliens and the prison guards are fighting each other all over the prison, and you're basically given the option to join in or just slip past in all the chaos. You even get to hop into a mech suit a few times throughout all of this as well. But even then, like, this still isn't the end, because at this point, Riddick gets captured again.
I'm putting you in cold storage.
This time being put into cryosleep where he has to break out again, before he's then finally able to escape and make it off the planet with Johns. All of course to just then crash later on during the events of Pitch Black. Now throughout all of this, you can really break the gameplay down into 3 main categories. You got the melee combat, the stealth, and then the shooting. With the melee combat being the one you'll be doing the most early on, and also sadly the aspect that's arguably aged the worst. Now the first real main combat section in the game has you fighting your way through like 5 or 6 inmates before taking on what's more or less the first boss fight against Rust. And combat is simple on the surface. You either attack or block, and can then hit in different directions depending on what movement buttons you press. So if you move backwards and punch, then it's going to be an uppercut, whereas moving left and right is going to be right or left hooks. The thing is you're never really taught how all of this works in any sort of proper tutorial sequence outside of that brief prologue. And then the first time where you really have to fight is when you have to get through half a dozen guys back to back, with only a single healing station for all of them, followed by the boss fight against Rust, who is probably going to beat the crap out of you. Which ends up forcing you to play in one of 2 ways. The first is that you can abuse the only real melee combo in the game, where Riddick does a 1-2 punch, hitting quickly in both directions. Which not only usually stun locks whoever you're attacking, but also does decent damage. Then the other strategy is just to abuse the reach of some of the weapons, like the shivs, stabbing someone in the face before they're able to get off a hit, along with then just simply backing off when they get too close. Now this is hands down the most effective method, but even still when you're doing this, enemies will often ignore being hit and just attack you right on through. Other times though, you might just even be able to get by spamming an attack over and over until someone's dead.
I'm winning.
But the other thing is that after you've played through this whole riot sequence early on, you've really just experienced all of the depth that the melee combat's ever going to have. All of the so-called boss fights are just more or less against the same looking human enemies, who all function like Rust. There is a parry system where if you time it just right, you can block an enemy's attack and then counter it, which is often going to kill them in a single hit. The idea is that you're supposed to wait just before their attack lands, and then if you press the button at the right time, you're going to perform the counter. But this system is just so inconsistent. Plus, it only seems to work for specific attacks and against certain enemies, which means that half the time I just end up doing it by mistake in the middle of getting my ass kicked. Like this bit here, for instance, when I was fighting Max fucking Headroom, and the guy was a couple of seconds away from outright killing me, but I somehow got lucky, got a parry off and ended the fight. But then on the flip side, like, it almost always works against enemies who are armed with guns, with a similar move where Riddick can grab someone's weapon, then turn the weapon back on them and blow their head off, weirdly making it where enemies armed with guns are somehow less dangerous than someone armed with a screwdriver. I have always kinda wondered if on some level they made it this way on purpose. I know Riddick is supposed to be a badass. I mean, we're talking about the same guy who killed someone using a soup cup.
Tea, actually.
So maybe they wanted to make the parry system a bit loose here, to really have you feeling like you were engaging in these life or death fisticuffs. Considering otherwise, you'd really just be countering your way through every fight with no drama.
Stop following me. I got important stuff to do.
Either way though, it does kind of detract from the melee combat a little bit, and it definitely makes it show its age. When you talk about first-person melee combat games, it's kind of hard to not bring up the Condemned series, but I do think that's a fair comparison here, considering those games really nailed how good a simple but well-designed combat system could be. I mean, all you had to do in those games was read an enemy's movements and then block accordingly. A well-timed block would throw them off balance, leaving them wide open to a follow-up hit. And it was a basic mechanic, but the sheer variety in a weapon's speed, damage, block, and attack style made it so much deeper. And I just kind of feel like Butcher Bay would have really shined more if it had a system like this, that felt more consistent and a whole lot less janky. But I mean, considering that this thing came out a whole year before Condemned did, I think we can excuse it for not being as refined. And I kind of feel that Starbreeze Studios more or less vindicated themselves with the melee combat in the recent Indiana Jones games anyway, which almost verbatim has the same parry and counter moves from Butcher Bay, only in a system which works a lot better.
They're the same picture.
What is also worth highlighting off the back of that is that Butcher Bay really is a truly cinematic experience, especially when it comes to how the gameplay presents itself. And outside of those moments when it switches to a third-person perspective when you're climbing ladders or going along ledges, you're seeing all of this through Riddick's eyes. One of the most underrated features this game has is that the player casts a shadow of their own, which you're going to frequently see as you're moving around, along with that ability to look down and see your torso and legs. When you've got a gun out, all of the information for how much ammo you've got left in the magazine is on the weapon itself. Kinda like what Doom 3 did for some of its guns too. And then when you reload, you get a temporary message showing how many spare mags you got left. Even that health bar is only displayed when you're in combat or taking damage. And you don't carry around magical medkits that you can fit into your back pocket. Instead, you come across medical stations with a finite amount. Oh yeah, and also to reinforce how you're in this truly hostile and nasty world, even the healing process in this game looks painful, with this machine outright stabbing Riddick in the neck with all these nasty looking syringes. Yeah, I hope a tetanus shot is included in that dosage. Speaking of Doom 3 as well, like this really was the year for games having engines showcasing dynamic lighting and shadows. And consider that in 2004 alone, we had Far Cry, Thief Deadly Shadows, and even Splinter Cell a couple of years prior. Really just was the peak of the whole bump-mapped, specular lighting approach to visuals. And although they can make the game look a bit dated at times, I also find it to be one of the most appealing aesthetics. The lighting actually plays a big part in the overall experience too, considering you can eventually shoot out most of the light sources in the environments, giving Riddick that much needed cover of darkness. You can even see a bit of foreshadowing here to the gameplay we'd eventually get in The Darkness, another game that Starbreeze Studios worked on that had you frequently shooting out the lights. And can I also acknowledge just how advanced this stuff was for the time? I mean, yeah, like in Doom 3, you could shoot out some of the lights, but nowhere near the extent that it was here.
Who's breaking those lights?
Plus, it was also that era of 2D skyboxes, back when those things were a literal work of art. All the more impressive as well when you keep in mind that this was also an Xbox game. And between this and the port for Doom 3, that console was really showing how much it reigned technological supreme to the PS2 and the GameCube. I mean, even that main menu is bursting with soul, having this really funky block effect every time you shift through the screens. Or just the kind of thing you really don't see in gaming anymore.
I'll check it out.
Anyway, getting back on track, the other gameplay component here is all the tactical espionage action. And this is again pretty basic stuff on the surface. You crouch, which enters you into that magical stealth mode, which then instantly makes you harder to hear. And when you're hiding in the shadows, a blue tin is all you need to tell you that you're fully hidden. From there, it's just a simple matter of waiting until someone's back is turned before you can then sneak up behind them and then end their life in any number of horrific ways. Take them out with your bare hand, for instance, and Riddick's just gonna snap their neck, but use something like a shiv and he'll ram it into their neck or back. Before then dragging their lifeless body off into the shadows so no one else stumbles upon it. And truly too, one of the all-time best stealth game tropes, hiding a body in a dark corner.
Darkness. I can hide the bodies here.
I've always loved the way too this game has you moving dead bodies by literally grabbing the body and dragging it across the room, real-time physics and all. And the only other game I can even think of that used this same approach was Deus Ex Human Revolution, which is not only cool from a gameplay perspective, but it also makes a bit more sense for Riddick as a character, treating people as this piece of meat that are just blocking his path. And yeah, like, you're not knocking people out with a blackjack or an M9 pistol, you are just flat out murdering every one of these assholes. But hey, like, better them than you, right? I like it too how some of the guns are DNA locked, like they're the lawgivers in Judge Dredd. Which prevents you from just picking up a gun off the first person you see and then just ignoring the stealth from that point on. It's only at specific key points in the story when you bypass this lock that it actually lets you shoot things. And all up, like, the stealth works well enough. I mean, you know, considering that it's from 2004. There is a tendency for the enemies to be a bit unpredictable at times, and when they're searching for you in the shadows with their flashlight, you're bound to get detected. And I would say that it's more of an issue, but about halfway into the game, you get this so-called tranquilizer gun. And not only does this thing let you shoot the lights and enemies with ease, but it also happens to have infinite ammo. Motherfucker, even again! Where from that point on, it makes the stealth so easy that I often found myself resorting to using the other weapons, just to give myself some semblance of a challenge. But it does beg the question though, like, why would I bother studying a guard's patrol route and biding my time to try to sneak up behind them when I could just shoot them from the other side of the room with a tranq gun, before then just stomping on their writhing body and calling it a day. Still though, this really is one of the earliest examples of a stealth game dynamically changing the visuals to let the player know that they're hidden, without ever even needing any on-screen prompts or text.
Here you go.
Enemies don't glow through the walls or have giant icons above their head. You gotta pay attention to your surroundings, and even something as simple as a shadow can give away their position.
1, 2,
Then the final aspect of the gameplay is all of the moments when you get your hands on a gun. Now with regards to the shooting, there's only 3 weapons all up, with a pistol, a shotgun, and then an assault rifle. With the pistol being the one I found myself using the least, instead swapping back and forth between the shotgun and the assault rifle, just depending on how much ammo I had and how close or far the enemies were during combat. Now the shooting ain't gonna win any kind of awards here, but it's functional and it does what it needs to do, with the weapons having a believable amount of recoil and bullet spread. Mostly I think so you can't just cheese your way through all of these shootouts and go for easy headshots. And on that note as well, it is one of the few games that justifies why enemies can survive so many of these. I mean, considering that all of the prison guards are decked out in full body armor, which makes sense as to why they tank so many shots to the dome. You also get those really satisfying early 2000s ragdoll effects when enemies are killed, which always ends up with some pretty damn funny results. And when you're taking on the dwellers in the sewers, it's common to see their body parts flying in all directions. Then you got those couple of sequences inside the mech suits, which are also fucking awesome, and let you tear the enemies a new shit pipe. I mean, it even gets to the point where Hoxie says that Riddick has caused so much damage that it's going to cost them more than his entire bounty to fix everything up.
Riddick has already cost me plenty.
All in all, I'd say that Butcher Bay is one of those sum of its parts kind of games. And while I think you could spend hours picking the whole thing apart, the fact of the matter is that overall it's a really solid experience pretty much from beginning to end. It's definitely aged poorly in some regards, but the way it effortlessly handles one of science fiction's most awesome anti-heroes is something that can't really be ignored.
I'm cool.
And even playing through it now in 2025 in more or less a single sitting, it still put a tingle on my arms and all the way up my ballsack.
Beautiful.
Getting your hands on a copy of this thing though is a little bit tricky nowadays, especially on PC. If you can somehow find a way to download that original game, I mean, that's going to work fine, but you are going to need a few patches and fixes to get the whole thing working. Aside from that, you've got that remaster that came bundled with the sequel Dark Athena. But weirdly too, this thing is also hard to get on the PC, with it no longer even being available on Steam or Good Old Games.
Come back, you son of a bitch!
This is definitely the most accessible option though, considering the remaster pretty much works flawlessly out of the gate. The only issue is that it removes that option to quick save and quick load, which does kind of suck in a game like this, one that's really often about experimentation and trying different tactics. It's always been kind of weird to me how technology in gaming has advanced so much, to the point that visuals are really pushing that boundary between in-game graphics and pre-rendered, and yet the basic convenience of something as simple as a quick save and a quick load, which has been around since the 90s, is all but non-existent.
You got a hearing problem.
At least on a positive note, if you play this version, you are also getting Dark Athena chucked in for bugger all. And I guess on that note, I should probably talk about this one as well.
Fuck me!
Now what's great about this one is that the story seamlessly picks up from where Butcher Bay left off, with Johns and Riddick quickly getting captured by a mercenary ship called the Dark Athena, with the ship's captain being voiced by a woman named Gail Rivas, who even worked alongside Riddick in the past.
Ah, Johns. I remember you.
Rivas is voiced by Michelle Forbes, who, among other things, did the voice work for Dr. Mossman in Half-Life 2.
Spitter's my XO. He says you do.
It's going to be a lot more like Black Mesa with Gordon here to help.
But more importantly than that, she was the one who gave Elaine the big salad in that one episode of Seinfeld, which really is the role that we should focus on the most.
George, all I did was hand someone a bag.
And again, much like Butcher Bay, this really is a stellar cast of voice actors, again with some great performances, obviously with the main one coming from Vin Diesel himself.
The monsters. They'll catch me.
Not the monsters. Have something to fear.
Along with a few other prisoners he runs into on the ship, one of whom is voiced by Lance Henriksen. Yeah, a little known actor who didn't really do any roles worth mentioning.
Perfect.
With Riddick working alongside all of these guys before eventually getting off the ship and then crash landing on a planet named Aguera Prime. You can definitely tell they tried to make Riddick a bit more sympathetic this time, as part of his overall goal is to help a little girl named Lynn. And I get it, I mean, if you want to get to the cold, dead heart of a chaotic, neutral character, well, saving an innocent little girl is the perfect choice. Lynn's also terrified by what she refers to as monsters, which in actuality are all these drones that are patrolling the ship. Because it turns out, as well as the grievous fashion crime that Rivas calls her hairstyle, she's also got this whole side gig going where she turns unwilling participants into essentially remote control combat zombies. With there even being one very awesome sequence where Riddick gets to have a go at these things, gunning down waves of mercenaries with complete ease. Which also happens to have one of the best bits of music in the entire soundtrack, in a soundtrack which is already pretty damn good. Visually as well, the whole thing is a pretty huge step up from the first game, especially when it comes to things like the facial animations and some of the environments. That jump between Butcher Bay and Dark Athena was essentially generational, and some of these environments really do look like they could be in a game released today, with the ability to still dynamically alter the area by shooting out light sources being really impressive. I mean, even just that water effect on Aguera Prime gets me all nostalgic. As for the gameplay, well, you can instantly notice just how much better a lot of this stuff feels, with the melee combat feeling more responsive and things like parrying being far more consistent as well. I mean, parrying enemies can still be kind of clunky, but you at least now get this thing where your weapon flashes for a brief second, to let you know if you can actually parry that attack to begin with. Which, you know, is a whole lot better than just shoving your fist up your ass and guessing. Plus, moving along ledges and platforming is a lot quicker here too, and you can slightly aim down the sights with guns now, making shots more accurate. Stealth has also been improved as well, with there being far more dark corners for you to hide in now, making sneaking up behind people a lot easier. Plus, I really appreciate how the crouch walk speed has also been made faster. And it all just goes a long way in really making you feel like this stalking killer, hiding in the shadows and taking people down in some pretty vicious ways. And it all just quickly falls into that very similar rhythm that the first game had, where it never feels like you're doing one thing for too long. Early on in the campaign, a lot of time is spent taking out all the various drones on the ship, and there's a really cool mechanic here where you can grab their gun arm and then use it on the other enemies. You got a fair bit of time after that fighting mercenaries with your melee weapons, and then right around the time that starts to get boring, you'll find the trank gun again. Then after that, you'll find the assault rifle and the shotgun, and get to blast your way through all the bad guys instead. With this whole sequence set inside this gravity chamber where enemy corpses are going to float off into the center of the room. There's even another cool sequence inside a mech suit, which really begs the question, just how much death and destruction can one man cause? And it just always seems like the developers were reading the player's mind and knew exactly what to do next. Like during a sequence early on here where you're avoiding a spotlight as you slowly climb up a whole bunch of containers. And it's probably going to seem a bit tedious and frustrating. So to make things right, after you found what you're looking for in the area, you're given a drone gun with infinite ammo. And you then get to mow down all these assholes you just spent 15 minutes hiding from. Even the flow of this starting area feels a whole lot better too, with it being a sort of central hub area, which you keep coming back to as you complete different objectives for all the prisoners.
What makes you think that?
The problem is that yet again, some of the boss fights are just fucking dreadful. Again, foregoing the entire blocking and parrying system in favor of just artificially difficult enemies, who can block all of your attacks and deal out massive damage. And it's just like the sequel has done nothing to address the issues the first game had, which means that yet again, beating these is a matter of exploiting their attack animations. Like the fight against this asshole, for instance, where it seems he's able to block every single one of my hits, forcing me to just wait for him to attack and then quickly get a hit in before he's able to connect.
Come on, Riddick. I'll fuck you up.
Or how about this fight against Rivas, where it's pretty much the same thing, only this time she's got an attack which can knock off an entire health block. Or you have 1-2, which is pretty much impossible to avoid. In fact, out of curiosity, I thought I'd check to see just how quick that attack was. And it seems that from the time she starts the animation to when it hits you, you've got about 25 frames, which, assuming you're playing the game at 60 FPS, means you've got just under half a second's worth of time to react. Even just confronting one of the hostile prisoners who's now armed with an assault rifle, it's not gonna let you use that disarm move. Yeah, despite it working on pretty much every single other enemy you've come across beforehand. And it's just a bit of a shame because they had a real opportunity here to improve upon this aspect, which is really something that plagued the boss fights in that first game. I mean, it could have been all based around reading an opponent's attack patterns and parrying at just the right time. I mean, it's not like entire video games these days are based around combat where parrying is key. But instead, it's all just about trying to get a quick shot in over and over as you whittle down someone's health.
Take this, motherfucker!
Once you get off the Dark Athena and make it to Agrera Prime though, is really where the game kinda goes to shit, with the last couple of hours really not being that great. And this is where the game introduces a new weapon called the Scar Gun.
Originally designed to improve people's lives.
Which fires out remotely detonated explosives with what might be the slowest firing rate of all time. And the problem is that you have to use this gun, because it's the only way to destroy all of these annoying spider robot turret things, which can melt your health off in nanoseconds. As well as having to use it to take down a bunch of alpha drones. A mechanic they reuse, by the way, about 7 or 8 times throughout the rest of the game. To the point that when I kept seeing another one of these guys pop up, it had me audibly groaning in frustration. And it's not that it's hard or challenging, it's just that it's the same tedious process over and over, of shooting at these things with the Scar Gun, before then finally finishing them off with a melee takedown. From this point on as well is where it's basically just nothing but combat, with very few options left, if any at all, for stealth. And quite a lot of time too, you get ambushed by the enemies in these really crappy situations.
It's dying time! I'm gonna fuck!
Wait, what did he say? He's gonna what?
It's dying time! I'm gonna fuck!
You do get to control the drone again here later on for another sequence, but this time it doesn't quite hit the same. Simply because you've already spent the last 60 minutes killing everything that moves. I mean, the first time you get to control the drones, it was a much needed change of pace, considering you just spent the last couple of hours skulking around and trying to avoid too much attention. So to finally be able to unleash in a situation where you essentially can't be killed, well, felt pretty damn good. However, if you've already spent an hour shooting things, well, then the mechanic of shooting more things isn't really going to seem that exciting or different. But it's this over-reliance on the SCAR gun that chafes my willy the most. And you can tell they really banked on this thing being a primary mechanic for the remainder of the game, because you not only have to use it during combat, but also just for basic puzzles and navigation. As well, of course, of it being used for the final fight against Revis, who's amazingly still alive even after taking a hairpin blade through the throat. Oh yeah, this final fight is an absolute joke, by the way, where your goal is to just shoot her into this nearby vent with the SCAR gun, and oh my god, look at that ass.
Claude, have mercy.
And I can't help but think as well that it would have made more sense if they swapped these fights around. Like this fight should have been the first one on the Athena, where you end up blasting her out of the ship like Ripley did at the end of Alien. With her being in that suit then explaining how she managed to survive and make her way to Agrera Prime. I mean, it's a lot more believable than her surviving this. Then the final fight is when she's fed up with Riddick's bullshit and takes him on hand to hand. You know what I mean? No more tricks, mano a mano or whatever. Which would also make it a lot more meaningful when he kills her with her own hairpin. Also making things seem like they've come full circle, considering he stole it from her during that cinematic where she's first introduced. Either way though, that's the end of the game, and she falls down that vent like she's Darth Maul before we get a grand total of 20 seconds of dialogue between Riddick and Lynn before the whole thing just hard cuts to the credits.
Is she coming back?
When I say goodbye, it's forever.
So yeah, like all up, Dark Athena ain't quite as good as the first game was, but it's hard to deny the value you're getting in this thing overall, considering this also came with that free remaster of the first game.
Yes, sir.
I think both of these titles really epitomise that era where Starbreeze Studios really seemed like they could do no wrong. Between Butcher Bay, Dark Athena, and then The Darkness, it was just such a really solid lineup of innovative and creative experiences, and experiences that really never have been replicated. After that is when they merged with Overkill Software and made The Walking Dead and Payday 3, yikes. While those who left the company formed Machine Games and made Wolfenstein: The New Order and The Old Blood. And that's where the history lesson ends. Updated remasters or even re-releases for both those original Riddick games, funnily enough along with The Darkness, is something that fans have been clamoring for a while now. And I'm sure that at some point someone is going to do God's work and update them for a more modern audience. Still though, they've mostly aged pretty well, and they're a wonderful little time capsule back to a point where the industry really was at its peak. And also for when Vin Diesel was known for far more than just living his life a quarter mile at a time.